Last year I made my first 1950 Dubrovnik Chess set, which turned out pretty good, but it was far from perfect, and I quickly made a second set experimenting with a few different things. Then I got distracted for a while turning bowls, and when I started on the third set, I worked on reducing the gloss level of the finish. I revised the shape of the queen's crown, as well as the angle of the cuts, and verified the number of cuts on the crown. I took another look at the knights and found that there are two slightly different variations, and I decided to focus on this first variation. I made an outlining template which helped them turn out much more uniform. For the turning, I abandoned my duplicator setup and just used traditional turning methods. I did make these quick marking jigs though to save some time with the calipers. That duplicator setup could be improved quite a bit, but honestly I was just using it as a crutch for my lack of turning skills. And now I'm probably faster turning by hand. One thing that was difficult in the first set was getting all of the spheres on the pawns to be consistent. Some of them were a little oval, so I contemplated making a radius cutting tool or a small sphere cutting jig, but the easiest thing was to first get the sphere close by hand using a skew, and then I made a radius sander to bring it into round. And then sanding the finer grits by hand. And that did a good job making all the pawn spheres look uniform. And I did the same thing for the other spheres in the set, like on the king. And that finished off the third set, which certainly had the fewest defects of all the sets so far. And it gave me some confidence to consider selling a set. The first commission set was for Mike Ledzinski, or known as Goodnight Mike on chess.com. He's quite a notable collector, so the pressure was on for me to deliver a professional set. He wanted a set with a 4-inch king, with a high gloss, and he wanted extra knights, so both variations of the knights. I scaled up my knight template for the 4-inch kings, as well as all the other pieces. Somebody suggested putting a maker's mark on the pieces, so I did that on the bottom, under the bays, as well as a serialization of the set. To make the mark easier, I made a branding iron by embossing the logo in the end of this piece of brass round bar. I'm using the milling attachment on the lathe to cut out the lettering with the Dremel. Remember, it needs to be a mirror image of the logo. And now reducing the diameter to put the thread on. Now I can put the thread on with this die. And then I could thread it into this cheap wood burner. It took some practice to get a feel for the right pressure and dwell time, but once I got it, I was branding everything. This made marking the pieces go much faster. And that's the 4-inch set without finish. With finish. It seems to still fit nicely on the 2¼ inch squares. Now to tackle the second variation of the knights. At first, this was the best photo I had of the second variation, so I attempted to make them using the same template as the first variation. Starting by outlining the profile and cutting that out on the bandsaw. Then drilling the hole in the bottom to accept the pin from the pedestal. Then marking and cutting out the front to back profile on the bandsaw. Now more outlining using the template. This was the usual method I used to make all the knights. I'm sure all the experienced wood carvers are probably cringing. I made about 4 attempts at the second variation of the knight, and I wasn't very satisfied with any of them. Then I found this profile photo and made a new template of that and had another go at it. Oh, but I also took a time out to build this wood duplicator, which was a project by itself. It did save considerable time in the carving though. I was mostly using a coarse bit in the duplicator, so I just had to remove the fins where the vise was holding it. And what's nice about the duplicator is that you can use it to duplicate almost anything. And those are the second variation knights completed. That profile photo I found really helped bring the right proportion, as it was a little taller than the first variation. And here's a comparison of them side by side. In my next videos I might show my experiments with weighting the sets, including some tipping angle calculations, my experience with basing and cutting the base out on the lathe. Took some trial and error to get that right. Very nice. And my duplicating machine, but that's still a work in progress. Thanks for watching.